All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the third class of our 5-session online seminar, Getting Started in Family History Research. My name is Kathleen McKenzie, Education and Programming Manager here at American Ancestors, and I'll be moderating tonight's class. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. So returning to teach this third class is Chief Genealogist David Allen Lambert. David has been on the staff of American Ancestors since 1993, and he is an internationally recognized speaker on the topics of genealogy and history. He's published many articles in the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, the New Hampshire Genealogical Record, Rhode Island Roots, the Mayflower Descendant, and American Ancestors magazine. He has also published a guide to Massachusetts cemeteries. David is also an elected fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society in Boston, and he is a life member of the New Hampshire Society of the Cincinnati. He's also the tribal genealogist for the Massachusetts Punkapoag Indians of Massachusetts. His genealogical expertise includes New England and Atlantic Canadian records of the 17th through 21st century, military records, DNA research, and Native American and African American genealogical research in New England. So in this third class tonight, David will discuss how to find the records that you're looking for and how to build out a research log. As usual, we will have 3 breaks for questions during tonight's session. So at any time, please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A field found at the bottom of your screen. You'll find a PDF of today's slides at the online course page, as well as a handout and some templates that David will be talking about as well. And starting tomorrow, you'll be able to go back and watch a recording of tonight's presentation on that course page. All right, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming David.
Thank you, Kathleen, and I'm delighted to join everyone again. I hope last week's class was enjoyable and informative, and I hope the same is true for this one. Genealogy is something that we really just dig into, and like we're spending all these hours, it may be at a library or online, gathering information, and sometimes we kind of lose track of, oh, we already looked at that. So the research log idea is going to be a great thing. But I also want to bring into the idea that there are online sources and there are also bricks and mortar resources. So, and again, with the American Ancestors Center opening next week on the January 21st, you can get a taste of American Ancestors in person if you happen to have the chance. So, without further ado, let's continue. This is kind of a funny little cartoon. I don't know if you've subscribed to our weekly genealogist, but Gene Powers does a lot of our artwork and puts pictures in for captions. This one is the genealogical iceberg metaphor, as we call it, because it's an iceberg. You just see what's on the top of the water. And may it be online or a published genealogy. Wow, isn't that pretty? It's all done. Has to be perfect, right? Then you do a little deep diving and realize careful research is going to be required. In my case study at the end of the class, you'll see where a published genealogy from over a century ago uh, is going to allow me to make a research log. And in the following class next week, Melanie McComb will go through that research log and do the research and show you what she discovered and what actually turns up to be true and maybe some surprises. Now, obviously, with the iceberg metaphor, one thing is what you're doing right now. It's gaining the education that there is more than just a book or a completed chart online. And what we're hoping with like the research plan I did with you last week and the research log which I'll cover today, that the organization of trying to strategize your objectives will be the best thing for your research. And so we'll continue on now. So we're going to talk about look for missing information. Well, we kind of touched base on that a little bit last week, but let me reiterate it a bit. So here we have a chart. This is for a colleague, Lindsay Fulton, and you could see that when she started this chart, there was some missing holes in her tree. In fact, her paternal line, she wasn't sure of who John Fulton and Annie Fraser's parents were, or Chester Brown and Clara Wharton. So those are some gaps, but it may just be a fact. On a maternal side of her tree, you can see that Agnes Carey Ambrosi, well, she wasn't sure where she was born and when. So again, each one of these should be adapted to one research log per person. That's the angle that you go in. Now that being said, a research log, as we'll talk about it, could also be applicable to one event of a person, especially if you don't know the location. We'll talk more about that later. So you want to define what you're looking for. And in the case of a genealogy chart, you may find that some of this information fits into it or some of it fits into your overall scope of genealogy. So obviously a birth date in that place, marriage date in that place, a death date in that place. Because I mean, obviously both are, if you have one or the other, it's going to be a clue. So if you know that somebody lived in Boston, Massachusetts or Kalamazoo, Michigan when they died, and you know approximately the decade, or you know they were alive in, say, the 1940 census, but dead by the 50, you get a range, then you have the date. If you know the exact date they died, because somebody has a gravestone, doesn't necessarily mean they died in the same place the cemetery was. So you can start looking at places locally, county records, state records. So you can kind of see the angle I'm going with this. Maiden name might be what you're looking for an ancestor. Their military service. Education is always a fun thing to try. If you can find surviving elementary right through senior and high school records or even college, that's always a benefit because sometimes the parents are mentioned. Parents' names are obviously important for going back to the previous generation. And maybe one of the records on the column on the left will help you define who the parents are. Maybe on a birth record, obviously, is the best one. Marriage information often includes parents on later records starting in the 19th century. And a death record may also list the parents. Of course, from that, you may even find on that document, especially a death record in the late 19th, early 20th century, as to the place of birth of parents. That's a clue. Remember, the parents are probably not there at the time when the child is an adult and passes away. So you want to use that as a clue for your research log and prove it. So finding that was the parent really born in the place that the death record of their child states. Immigration year. Well, the census is great for giving immigration and naturalization information, but do you have the passenger list? Do you have the naturalization? Or furthermore, did they really ever naturalize? So you want to confirm these facts and not just settle down with the fact, well, it's on the census, it has to be right. Siblings' names and children's names may also be something you're looking for that expands beyond the story of your direct line. And it's important to look at siblings and children. Why? Because a death record of a sibling might give information about who the parents are when you can't find the information on your direct ancestors' obituary, say, or death record. So looking at siblings is good. You got to kind of move the blinders to the side and look for both siblings and children to get clues. You want to review your research plan, similar to what we went over last week. And of course, we talked about the research subject and then developing a research question around the subject of the question. So your ancestor, John MacDonald, what was the research question? You wanted to find out where he comes from Scotland. Now, then you wanted to put down what you know about that question and how it is known. May it be oral history, may it's a clue from a census record or a vital record. You want to put down different record dates for reference. That way it jogs your memory. The idea of a research plan and a research log are to give you the tools so you're not reinventing the wheel. A working hypothesis is also a wonderful thing that you can place into this because that might be your theory. Well, I believe John MacDonald is from Edinburgh, Scotland, based upon a story I heard. And I found one reference that says a name of a sibling, and that sibling's obituary says he was from Edinburgh. So that's where you're going to work on your research plan based on those clues. Then you have a list here of which records I will need. And of course, There are only 5 options here. You can obviously expand to the back of the paper or even create your own in, say, Excel or in Word to create certain records that you might need. And then, of course, adding that search strategy. Where do you go to get the records? May it be online, may it be in person, maybe it's someplace you have to write to. So this is the best way to kind of move forward before you get into the research log. Now, I'm just going to review this, and this is on your syllabus for you as well. I think these are some great little clues. And think of the first column is the information you're going to need. So you're looking for somebody's age. Well, our go-to are searching these records first. So the middle column is what we would normally check to confirm an age. That would be the census, vital records, or maybe even the cemetery. Gravestone might have the age of the person or even their date of birth. Now, if that doesn't work out, you might want to try military records or taxation. Might give somebody's age because, well, they're old enough to be drafted or too old to be drafted or serve in the military. Or taxation might indicate that somebody is of a certain age and a deposition is given. Birth date and birthplace, obviously we turn to vital records. But of course, the secondary place to try would be cemeteries, newspapers, and census records. Country of foreign birth. Normally we go to naturalization records, vital records, or census, but there's also an opportunity to use military records, vital records, or newspapers. Death date and death place, vital records, cemeteries, probate records, and newspapers are usually our go-to. And if they don't really help you or you're looking for more detail, turn to a newspaper. That might be an obituary. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a family Bible record, or maybe a military record because the person died in the service or collected a pension and the pension records the date of death of the pensioner. Foreign birth location, vital records, published genealogies, biographies, naturalization, immigration, and census. But the vital records that you're looking at might just not be the United States, but maybe looking for vital records in the country of birth. Newspapers, histories of the town often will give a clue as to where someone may have immigrated from. And of course, immigration records for those leaving and immigration of those records of the people arriving into passenger list might be where you're going to find that clue or confirm a clue that will go even deeper as to right down to the village, say. Immigration date often can be confirmed from census and of course, passenger list and naturalization. But you might find something in a newspaper. Did somebody in that family that you're researching live to be 100 years old or 80 years old? Maybe there's a bio or an obituary that gives some detail as to who they were in the town and where they came from and when. Biographies are a great thing to turn to. These are town histories that may have been written up in giving the story of the first immigrants that come in or later arrivals. A maiden name, we turn to obviously vital records and newspapers, but the maiden name could be carved on a gravestone in a cemetery, be on a pension record for a widow of a Civil War or Revolutionary War veteran per se, in her application stating her name at marriage. Probate records are often a clue too, because perhaps her own brother is the person, the executive of her estate, and it's named so accordingly. Marriage date and place, vital records, census, and newspapers are our go-to. But in case you don't have that, looking at cemeteries, military records, probate records, and naturalization, and also land are a good way because it does now list the husband and wife as a couple. Parents' names, vital records, census, probate records, newspapers, and published genealogies. But where are you going to find that also? Maybe the immigration record was a family traveling together. Places that families have lived, obviously census, land records, of course, local histories and city and town directories. But you may also find it in military records. Again, Civil War pension records, for instance, have a part of an application in the early part of the 20th century that had you list everywhere you lived after the war and when. Taxation records are also great, and more of these are being transcribed and indexed and searchable on, say, family searches, full text search. You may stumble upon a tax list for your ancestor for a town that you never knew they lived in. And obituaries obviously give that clue as well. Now, this is not carved in stone. The middle column is pretty regular, but the column on the right, what other records to search? This is where I'm going to hark back to talking to our Ask a Genealogist service. Again, it is available 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday, free on AmericanAncestors.org. You'll be actually chatting with genealogists who work for American Ancestors. You can say, I went to David's class and he gave me some ideas about census and immigration and naturalization for an immigration date. And then he also talked about newspapers and biographies. That's not working out for me. Any other suggestions? Because obviously we could expand on this and talk a whole class on each one of these. So that's just another tip to maybe help you out. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And we're going to start about learning about the place. Because obviously the place is going to be where the event occurs and hopefully also nearby where the records are. Now, the importance of a place, obviously, your research question will inevitably involve on a particular place. Again, putting on the blinders at one event at a time, because obviously in the course of somebody's life, there may be multiple places. Not everyone is born, married, and died in the same town or same country for that matter. Historians use a place to refine their questions of, quote, why did this happen here? What can we learn about X by focusing on this location? A place also provides context for the understanding your research subject. How did the place of residence affect what that person did and how they actually lived? Yeah, now you'll need to locate sources from that place, and you want to search by the subject, that place itself. So, like the Family History Library Catalog, American Ancestors Catalog, Library of Congress, wherever you're searching to find things. And that could even be at the location itself. When you go to the public library or historical society, inquire to what records exist at a particular place at a particular time when your ancestor or family was living there. Now, learning about a place, establish what date the community was founded. I'm going to give you some clues on some online sources and guides that may help you with that. Because to know when the community was founded is imperative to know what record group. Because a lot of times towns were founded from other communities. So if you were looking, say, for where I grew up, prior to 1726, it was the town of Dorchester. And by 1740, it started to splinter off. And through the 18th century and 19th century, it became three other towns. So you might have to hark back and kind of learn a little genealogy of the community your family lived in. What was the name of the original town that the community was created from? Especially if your ancestor may have been born at the cusp or they arrived maybe a little bit before. And those records are going to be grouped together differently. They're not going to combine them all together. What are the dates of the earliest records of the place you're looking for? There's obviously a variety of things. May it be there was not a settled town clerk or a church sexton to record records. Maybe there was a disaster like a fire, or maybe the records are just not in the community and they've been placed in a county or a state archive for good keeping. Any record loss issue for these locations is important to know because if you start looking, say if you're on Family Search and you find that, wow, nothing goes back beyond 1916, if you don't find a record online, I'm going to give you a couple of places that you can search. Contact the town clerk. They're going to know if their records are gone because of a fire, a flood, or they just really didn't have a good town clerk before 1916. Where are the records located? Now, you want to learn about the place and time again. So just knowing where records for that state or that county or that town are located. Unfortunately, it would be wonderful if you could go into one state archives that has copies of all the town, county, and state records. And this is an example back to my early career. Before I worked at NEHGS American Ancestors in 1993, I was employed by the Massachusetts State Archives. We would have people coming in looking for records, and we didn't have. But you're the state archives. Why don't you have them? They should have everything. And yes, in a perfect world, state archives would be a great repository for such things, but some things are still retained at the court level. They might have a cutoff date, and older records go to an archive, for instance. And also keep in mind that town clerks will still want to keep their originals and may have not been so good about sending copies to the state when they asked. You want to learn about the geography. Real easy, get a map. And that map could be as easy as going onto Google Maps, putting in the name of the town and looking at that. And you may also find there are historic maps. And in my syllabus, I provided a large list of different places you can get maps and gazetteers. So hopefully that will help you with your research. And also I've given some tips for finding maps and gazetteers, for instance, in other places around the world. Which records are most likely to have the answer? Then that's a question once you've educated yourself to what collections exist. And that may be looking at the Family Search Wiki, looking at, for instance, if it's New England, the New England Research Guide that American Ancestors published, and this is in the 6th edition. And of course, you want to know where those records were repositories. Again, harking back to that free service, Ask a Genealogist. This is where I can't find this. Can you help me locate it? It's a reference question. And again, our reference services have been closed or have been opened while we have been closed physically. But now you get the benefit of also being able to use the Ask a Genealogist and come in the library and ask someone at the reference desk again. I've mentioned Family Search's wiki, and really easy to find. If you go to Google and put in familysearch.org space wiki, you can go to it, or you can get to the wiki right from Family Search itself. And we're going to look at two different places, Dutchess County, New York, and Bennington, Vermont, just to see a comparison of what the wiki tells us to find. And this is, again, just scratching the surface. So I'm putting in Dutchess County, and obviously you can see it's auto-filling a batch of things, but I'm going to pick Dutchess County, New York, and hit search. It's giving me a breakdown, telling me that the county was named for Mary of Modena, Duchess of York. The term Duchess is an archaic form of the word Duchess, and the county is located in the southeast area of the state of New York. It's telling me where the county courthouse is. Now, this is just as part of a screenshot. As you can see on the left-hand side of the table of contents, this goes on to record loss, boundary changes, populated places, history timeline, talks about other things like Bible records, biographies, and even more. So give a search of some of the locations your ancestors are, and you'll also find links to databases on Family Search that may aid you that or how to find them. Now, in the case of the Dutchess County Courthouse that we see right there, as you can see, there's a hyperlink to the Dutchess County website. So it's not just things on Family Search. That could be the leaping off point for you to find things away from Family Search that you may not even known existed. On the right-hand side, we find out that the county seat in Dutchess is Poughkeepsie. We find that it was organized on the 1st of November, 1683, and it's an original county. That means that you're not looking for earlier county records in Dutchess because that was the original county for that region. And then we can see neighboring counties on the right. So there's a real plethora of information. All right, we're going to go on to the next screen. And what we find here for neighboring area right across into the Vermont border is Bennington County, Vermont. We can look here and see that birth records were kept at the creation of the town. So were marriage and death. Court records go back to 1861 and land go back to 1782, probate 1778, and census 1790. Now, just most people know that the town does not keep the probate records. Well, some towns do. In fact, in Vermont, land records are kept on the town level, and court records are done in a district level, where that means that it could span more than one county. So Vermont is an interesting state in that regard, but it will explain that for you right in the wiki. So what we're learning here is immediately on the bottom that record loss, there is no known history of courthouse disasters in this county. Thank goodness. Now, there we go to Dutchess County, New York. And obviously, this is a county that's been around since the 1680s. But we see our record limitations in the middle. Statewide registration of birth doesn't begin to 1880. Marriages, 1908. Death, 1880. But court records go back as early as 1730. Land records, 1718. Probate, 1752. And there's even a local county census for Dutchess County in 1663. Then we get the break of some bad news. At the bottom, we learn of record loss. The county courthouse in Poughkeepsie was burned in 1806, but no public records were destroyed. So if you find that there's a gap someplace, it may explain what records were lost because they had an inventory. But in this case, it was a fire. Well, but no public records were destroyed. And there's a footnote for a further article, and it'll probably tell you some more things about it. So if we did a comparison, and we just did this in Excel, looking at the two counties, creating this ourselves, Family Search doesn't compare to for you. We can see that Bennington was formed in 1779, Dutchess in 1663. There's an early settlement back when it was a Dutch colony. The birth at the creation of the town in Bennington, Dutchess in contrast is 1880. And as you can see, marriage, death, court, land, probate, census, and record loss, none in every case. The only limitation you have is that when the records were started to be created. And that is a template that you just can put right into your research plan. So that fills right in. Now, understanding place names, boundary changes, and administrative divisions. We're going to dig into this a little bit and kind of explain how to understand these better. Now, administrative divisions. Now, the one thing to understand, the records are maintained at different administrative levels, and you really must know exactly where to look for your ancestor and what you can expect to find there. As I had mentioned, in Vermont, if you want to look for land records, you're going to go to the town. If you want to look for probate, you're going to go to a district area. And if you do that for Massachusetts, well, the land and the probate are typically in the same courthouse in most cases, and that's on the county level. So educate yourself on what the conditions of record locations are, and it'll save your sanity a little bit when you're looking for them. Now, place name categories. Any level of a name might change over time. That comes right down to the street name, all the way to the name of the country, and this is true across the board. Your ancestor might have never moved off the same piece of land, but because jurisdictions of place names have been changed, it looks like your ancestor moved. And you realize that they've had the same farm their whole time of their life. Outside of the United States, there are similar levels of administration. For instance, in Germany, Staats are a city, Kreis, county, and land is in the state. In Ireland, you have breakdowns such as townland, civil parish, and county. So your townland would be the smallest area your ancestor might have lived, attended the church of the civil parish, which would also be the place where records would be recorded. And there's also the county level before you get even into Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland later on. Place name categories. What is the drill down of location? Well, in a perfect world, we're going to know right down to the street address our ancestor lived and maybe go and stand near the cellar hole or maybe even knock on the door of where our ancestor once lived. You want to know then the municipality, aka town, village, or city. Now, in my hometown, I live in the Dry Pond district. Doesn't have a post office. Never did, actually. It's just the neighborhood within Stoughton, Massachusetts that I've grown up and lived in my whole life. That is a good clue because that might, on a level, let you know what cemeteries or what schools your ancestor may have attended. Now, in some cases, such as like Ireland or in England, for instance, parish would be the village or the parish your ancestor may have lived in. County, where the town or the parish would be located in, and that is true of the grouping together for places in the United States. Of course, we have states in the United States. We have provinces in Canada, for instance, and that's the larger grouping of all of the counties. A region, such as where I live in Massachusetts, we're part of the New England region. And then, of course, country, the United States. Now, place name terminology, and again, this is all in your syllabus, so please don't take exhaustive notes. A parent town or county, a town from which another town is created, like my hometown. It was part of Dorchester prior to our incorporation in 1726. Dorchester was an original town. So I know that if I'm looking for records in my hometown, because people were living there before we incorporated as Stoughton, I need to look at Dorchester church records and town records. Then I'm also might know that my town split off. In the 18th and 19th century, as I had mentioned, we had daughtered towns. That means a town that is created from another town, obviously similar to what the parent we talked about just a moment ago. So in my community, there are parts of my town that I would be looking for historic locations or cemeteries that are now in another town completely. But before their incorporation, they're part of the greater history of my community. As we approach our 300th anniversary next year, I'm involving the towns of Sharon, Avon, and Canton, and part of Foxborough to be part of it because we're the celebration of the original town they all came from. An annex, that is land from one municipality that becomes part of another. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a name change completely. In an annex, essentially portion of that property either becomes or is renamed to form another municipality. Extinct. That's when a town or a county no longer exists as a legal entity. That means that the town name completely is eradicated and is renamed. Or the boundaries didn't last, or if you have an area such as Enfield, Massachusetts, that did exist prior to the 1930s, it's now under the Quabbin Reservoir. Exonym, an external name of a geographical place. For instance, Germany versus Deutschland. Incorporated town versus unincorporated community. In some places, people have an incorporated community that has a date of incorporation, it has a town government, but an unincorporated community may be in a region, some places up in Maine, that might be a district that has a district government. Why do place names change? Well, there's any number, and let me kind of cover some of them. In general, at any level of administration, boundaries are redrawn or a new community is incorporated or disincorporated by the will and pleasure of the voter or the town government. Early on, my own community, the church, was a far distance for the people who lived in the second and third precincts. So other churches were created. Ultimately, those communities grew up larger, wanted to have their own voice in town government, and then petitioned the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be incorporated as a separate uh, community that is now incorporated under another name. It has their own town government. Population outgrows the original name and location. In the colonial era, many people are, of course, settling coastally and on the rivers. But when you have 8 to 10 children, and they have 8 to 10 children, it's kind of hard to divide up your original 100 acres without everyone getting just about an acre or two. And in the colonial days with farming, that wasn't always the case. So you find a lot of population movement and growth. So towns that are on the fringes of the wilderness, if you will, push further west as much as they can. Memorialization of a person or event. My hometown, that South Precinct of Dorchester, the original name for the region was Ponkapog. It was the second praying Indian village set up by John Eliot for the local Native Americans as a Christian praying town. But in 1701, Judge William Stoughton, Lieutenant Governor and former Chief Justice during the time of the Salem witchcraft trials, died. His father and he owned a lot of land in what is currently the Ponkapog area. So when the town incorporated in 1726, a quarter of a century later, they memorialized and gave the name after the former governor. To avoid confusion, is another reason place names change. You realize at a certain point in time there were two Falmouth, Massachusetts? Well, there were, because Falmouth, Maine, prior to 1820, was Falmouth in the District of Maine in Massachusetts. There's also a Falmouth on Cape Cod. This isn't the only instance across the map. War and political regimes caused major place name changes as we look at the history of places like Germany. How does a name change affect my personal research? Well, knowing whether or not there was a movement helps us determine where to find records and determine the migrations. Did my ancestors move or did the boundary get redrawn? Town and municipal names. When a town is incorporated or charted, it needs a name. You sometimes get township two, and sometimes the early censuses, you might find there is no incorporated name right away, especially if it's on the cusp of it just being settled. But shortly after, it should get a name. The town may continue using the name of the settlement or a variation thereof of its residents, or they may choose a new name. There are many times that a town's boundaries don't change at all, but they decide to rename a community. If a town is annexed or disincorporated, the town no longer exists as a legal entity. The town name may be retained as a neighborhood or a post office name. And you might find that to be the case. You may originally see this large community in the 18th century, but now it's a small section of a neighborhood, but it was retained for historic purposes. Here's an example of how a place kind of changes. And this is, we're going to talk about John Hecker for a minute. In 1870, John Hecker is enumerated in Carrollton, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. There's a screen capture of it right below there. In 1880, he's enumerated in New Orleans, Orleans Parish, Louisiana. Wait, that's strange. He must have moved. Well, if we look on the column on the right, we learn that the town of Carrollton was annexed in 1876. The boundaries moved, but John did not. Before 1876, a search for John in Jefferson Parish, and after 1876, you have to search for John in Orleans Parish. County records are a crucial source for genealogists. In most cases, estates, court, land, and probate are maintained on that county level. Again, we mentioned Vermont. That's a different, and same case with Connecticut, just to name a couple. Now, sometimes vital records are also held at the county rather than the municipal levels. Now, and that might be where you're finding the case, maybe your ancestors were all living out in, say, Michigan, that you've been able to research back. So you're very puzzled when we talk about New England, where it's in the town level. So again, looking at that family search wiki or understanding the history and record keeping on the community, the county, and the state will better allow you to know where you're looking and also understand why they're arranged in such a way. County administrative divisions between towns and state. Boston, Suffolk County, Massachusetts. In Louisiana, for instance, it's a parish. In Alaska, it's a borough. Consolidated city populations, both a municipal corporation, a city, and an administrative division of a state or a county. There are coterminous borders, and like places that have the same region, but main men have a different government, like New York City, New York, New Orleans, Louisiana, Denver, Colorado, or Washington, D.C. Creation of a new county usually reflects a growing state population. Administrative responsibilities are too much for the existing county. Now, often a large county is formed at the time of statehood, and many daughter counties are formed. Original county may not even exist in any way, shape, or form. How about Tryon County, New York, or Augusta County, Virginia? Again, changes over time limit or eradicate a place. States like counties hold genealogical resources, particularly vital records. Unlike towns and counties, no United States state has changed its name after achieving statehood. Boundaries for some states have changed since colonies or territorial establishments of statehood. Original charters for Virginia, Massachusetts, and Connecticut secured land along to the Pacific coast. In fact, the oblong in Connecticut and New York, and the Virginia cedes to West Virginia. I remember being at the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland, Ohio, only seeing a map that showed that it extended originally once all the way to Connecticut. So you see that Virginia, Massachusetts, Connecticut went on a east to west parallel to show their boundaries. And that changed, of course. Country names. Well, the United States has retained the name since independence in 1776. And in Europe, name changes are more common and continue into the 20th century. Formal creation of a modern European country in the late 19th century, for instance, Germany, 1871, and Italy. World War I and World War II obviously drew new boundaries and created new countries. For some reasons, it was for a policy of self-determination. Places like Czechoslovakia in 1918 and the Czech Republic and Slovakia are created in 1993. Dalmatia in 1815 was part of the Austria-Hungary and part of Yugoslavia by 1918, and now Croatia in 1991. All right, we'll stop now for some questions and hope that that has been informative, and look forward to what you want to ask.
All right. Thank you so much, David. So yes, we will turn now to our first question session. So any questions, you can go ahead and pop them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. So to start off, David, we did get a question about kind of beginning to fill out your family tree.
Mhm.
So someone asked, when filling out the tree, should the single line person be me or my dad?
I would say in the case of what you're concentrating on. So you could start, of course, with yourself, and then you could also put your dad on one and create another chart that begins with your mother. As we go back in family tree charts, obviously in most cases, it'll go back to what your great great grandparent. So you're going to have to continue to another chart anyways, unless it's, of course, a digital tree. So I always start with myself, or in the case, if you have children, maybe start with your children and then you include yourself and your spouse um, for the next generation or your parents, whatever you see fit. But typically, we start with ourselves. And then when you start to expand it, you may find that you need a new chart for a great great grandparent, for instance.
Thank you, David.
Mhm.
And it looks like that's all the questions we have for the moment. So I think we can, oh, I spoke too soon. So somebody was typing out
I
there.
just noticed that too.
Yep. So let's see here. So another question just came in. What would a couple more. What would the
Right.
US county equivalent be called in Canada?
A county in Canada is a county, actually. So, for instance, my family were from a village called McCann in Nova Scotia, but it's located in Cumberland County. And the same thing is true with Canada as it is in the United States, is that, of course, counties can daughter away from a larger county. New counties are formed, and that's very true with Atlantic Canada and other parts of Canada. And the same thing is true with the towns. Towns can splinter off and become a new community or a daughter community. And that's why it's important to know who the parent community in the original county is for looking for earlier records. Canada is very similar to the United States in that regard.
Perfect. Thank you, David. And then another question here. Someone says, I have a town named after my family's surname, but today it is nothing more than coordinates. Would records be included at the state or the county level?
Well, I would try at the county level. I would first try to get my hands on a county history because it may be a history that might describe, for instance, the incorporation of that region now, what it's now being called. And it may echo back to when your ancestors first arrived and give you that history. It's always fun to have a bit of a mystery, but I think that one you could probably solve with some local history or even call the local public library. One of my best suggestions for a lot of times, and when we're not physically at a place, call the local public library that serves that region and ask who their local town historian or historical society is, who they run their questions by. And you'll probably get an answer quite quickly by email or a phone call to what you were wondering and where the records are.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, David. So that looks like it wraps up questions for now. So we'll keep things moving along, but as always, any questions, you can go ahead and pop them into the question panel at the bottom of the screen while David is speaking, and we'll have two more question sessions this evening. But David, I'll go ahead and turn things back over to you.
All right. Well, now we're going to talk about where the repositories themselves that we're looking for to find these records. There are two types of repositories: a brick and mortar, similar to where I work at American Ancestors in Boston, 97 Newbury Street, or online on AmericanAncestors.org. And so you want to find out if a brick and mortar organization has a website that might have databases that they may have put online that are easily accessible from home. And then you might find collections that exist in that brick and mortar institution that you can't find online. And that is true with American Ancestors. There are plenty of things that you can pore over in our books and our manuscripts that aren't online. And that could be due to copyright or just to the collection having not been digitized and indexed yet. So let's proceed and learn a little bit more about both of these. Now, a selected type of brick and mortar repository, guess where? Your own home. You have your birth record, right? Maybe you're married and you have your marriage record. Maybe you have a family Bible. You have some great photographs. Some of them have names on them. You have your grandmother's diary. Wow, you're an archive. Don't let anybody tell you different about all the stuff you've collected. Federal and state archives are also another valuable place. A federal regional archive could be the regional branch. Like in New England, we have one in Waltham, Massachusetts. But there's also the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And don't forget our state archives. The separation between federal and state means that if a record was created by the federal government, such as a U.S. naturalization, you're going to find that on a federal level. If it's something that was created on a state level, might even be a court record, or maybe even a state prison record, the state archives is more likely to have it. Town and city halls is another example of a brick and mortar repository. And think of just the records that are there besides the birth, marriages, and deaths that you want to pore over. Local historical societies are a gold mine. And the truth about a local historical society, many of them don't have the staff to digitize everything, or maybe even the budget. What they have in cabinets and in boxes might be the answer to your long sought after genealogical mystery. So invest in joining a local historical society and obviously visiting, or at least contact them. And if you can't reach them because they don't have a website, call the local public library. Ask who the president or the secretary of the organization is. Somebody is going to know a phone number or an email, and you can be in touch with them even if they don't have a website or you can't go there physically. Public or private libraries are also a wonderful place to look for records and manuscripts. College and university archives shouldn't be overlooked either, because someone may have donated all their papers, and maybe that was the minister of your great great grandparents' church, where the church records are gone, but his diary, noting all of the births, marriages, and deaths, is sitting there at a university archive. Lineage societies, places such as the DAR Library or the SAR Library in Louisville, Kentucky, are places that have their own both administrative archives as well as papers and genealogical records that relate to joining that particular lineage society. Genealogical societies often have a building or a library or a collection, such as places that you may have joined but didn't know where the papers are. inquire where they keep their archives, even if it's at somebody's house. Regional museums are great too. I can think of one down in Mystic, Connecticut, which has a tremendous maritime collection. Many of the region museums, such as the Peabody Essex Museum, have an archives, and we have visited with American Ancestors members and staff to the Phillips Library in Raleigh, Mass, where they have endless ship logs and other great genealogical records that you wouldn't think a museum would have more than paintings and artifacts. Oh, there's so much more to find. Some types of repositories, obviously, again, federal and state archives, town and city halls, local historical societies, those public or private libraries, again, college university archives, lineage societies, genealogy societies, regional museums. Any other that you may have tried? I'm more than happy to discuss other repositories that are not on this list. In another repository, for instance, a church, a temple, synagogue, wherever you might go to find the records itself. This is what I want you to do. Think of where the records are, but think outside the box of where they may have been originally created. Do they have a copy of them? In the idea of Massachusetts, state vital records were recorded in 1841. So that means that the city and town clerks could have been keeping records earlier. And chances are, and I know in the case of Massachusetts, you can find the original records at the state archives and the original records at the town where it was recorded. Because in 1841, every year a town or city clerk had to make a copy of the records, send it to the Secretary of State's office. But yet there's a third repository. Records after 1930, from 31 forward, are with the Department of Vital Statistics and the city or town. That's a little different. In fact, the cost of a civil vital record from the state Department of Vital Statistics is almost 8 times as much as until it gets sent to the state archives. A little tip, if you're looking for a certified birth, marriage, or death in Massachusetts between 1841 and 1930, look no further than the Mass State Archives. They still charge the same price they did when I worked there in 1987, $3 per certified copy. And that's a bargain. Online repositories. Well, let's talk about the big three. And maybe you visited these before. And I hope that you have visited AmericanAncestors.org, which has, of course, guest options and a paid version. FamilySearch.org, you may have visited. We've talked about Family Search and their wiki, a tremendous free website. And of course, many of you have probably heard of Ancestry.com, which incidentally, I remember when it was just a publishing company that did books. And of course, they're a paid service. And that are the big three, in my personal opinion. Location-specific websites, archives in a particular state, county, or city, like, for instance, the Washington State Digital Archives, Missouri Digital Heritage, or Baton Rouge Digital Archives, or regional, state, county, or city archives that are online with resources you can search from home. And this also applies to other countries, such as irishgenealogy.ie. Record-specific websites, for instance, fold3.com is owned by Ancestry.com and is a great repository and where they're putting all their efforts to put the military records and many government-related records that originally had not been created as digital form yet on Ancestry.com. Large genealogical websites, AmericanAncestors.org, Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, FindMyPast.co.uk, and also FindMyPast.com for United States records. FindMyPast is originally a UK company and has tremendous resources for the British Isles. Fold3.com, we mentioned, is owned by Ancestry and is a go-to place for things such as Revolutionary War or Civil War pension-related items, muster rolls. And did you realize that you can search War of 1812 pensions online on fold3.com for free. This is by the generosity of many genealogists who committed to a project to get these records digitized in color, but free of charge. rootsireland.ie, findagrave.com, genealogybank.com, newspapers.com, scotlandspeople.gov.uk. These are all both free and subscription-based services that are going to allow you to unlock records even when you can't get to that country or location yourself. Locating reference materials. Research guides and aids are a definitive must. In some cases, you can download it as a PDF on your computer or purchase the book or even find one at a local genealogical library or public library near you, so you don't need to buy a copy. Don't reinvent the wheel and make uh, yourself stressed. You really can use these guides and aids created by researchers and historians from the region to better travel the roads of the records you're looking for. Location-specific genealogy guides are a great thing to have. In more recent scholarly histories and geography books, when I do that, I always want to check the footnotes to see where the author got his or her information. And recent gazetteers are great, especially when you're dealing with places out west where it's all into the quadrants of square townships, and you can figure out exactly where a township region is. It's great, great resources. Get your hands on as much as you can as digital to have in your own virtual library at home. If not, the books that you can purchase and put on your bookshelf. FamilySearch.org wiki, again, is that place that you can go to find what is available for a particular location, such as a guide. So in this case, it's not a published book, but a digital and ever-changing guidebook that allow you to find the resources you need for across the globe. Remember what we were talking earlier about Dutchess County in Vermont? Again, remember these are places that you can go to find links to take you to elsewhere. With obviously the records of Geauga County, Ohio are listed on top, but in some of the wikis, it includes links to the actual individual cities, villages, unincorporated communities, and census designated places. Clicking on those will go to either records or another wiki page that further explain the records that you might need. I'm very pleased to show you this wonderful book, and this will be your speaker for Class 5, Rhonda R. McClure, who's been a long-time senior genealogist with American Ancestors. She is updated in this 6th edition, the Genealogist's Handbook for New England Research. I find this book so well loved in our library because it's a go-to. It gives you the places to get probate records and land records, district archives, and things that are amazing for your research. So you don't have to Google it. You can have this great book at home. Now, what I like even more about it is that it gives me that parent and daughter relationship on the communities and some great maps. Let me show you. So on here, we're looking at Maine. And just the beginning, we have a particular place like Acton, Maine. It was incorporated in 1830. It's in York County, and it was originally part of Shapley, Maine. So now I'd scroll down to Shapley and figure out when Shapley started and what original counties it was in. Gives you lots of information and it's at your fingertips. So now when you're looking and saying, well, wait a second, my ancestor couldn't have been born in Acton, Maine in 1815, but they died there. You now know that the place of birth of your third great grandmother was probably in Shapley, but you want to look further as well. The nice thing about the handbook as well are these wonderful, clear and concise maps. It gives us the boundaries and locations. What I love to look at is a map and seeing what the neighboring towns are, especially when towns will daughter off. Maybe the community your ancestor lived in separated 50 years after he or she died. That means when you go to the town and you're looking at a book on cemeteries in, say, for instance, Alfred, Maine, you can find that it may have separated off. And now the new town is where that old cemetery is physically in the boundaries of now. And there you look at another book. Always know the abutting communities to your ancestors' town, and it will make life a lot easier for you. And it also might explain why you married a girl from a town over, because that's a neighboring town. Another great book is The Red Book by Alice Eichholz. And this gives some great details on counties, when they were formed across the United States. And it also gives you when vital records started, probate and land courts, when they started. So it's a quick to guide. Now, you don't have to rush out and get it because it's out of print. But what you can do is find it online. And I've supplied this URL for you. And on the next screen, we have on wikirootsweb.com a link and all the breakdown of the actual book itself. So you can find all that great detail at your fingertips. And then that is just an example of Louisiana parish resources, giving you the map location, the county address, date form, parent counties, and when the records had their start and stop. And again, you may also use the Family Search Wiki to obtain some of this information as well. Another gazetteer that was done recently is the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. And this is a tremendous piece of scholarship for the region of New York, giving you the particular maps, as well as the towns and cities, villages, and particular notes that will aid you in your research as you traverse the large region of New York City and upstate New York. American Ancestors Library Catalog can be easily reached at library.nehcs.org. Even if you're not a member, you can search our library catalog and find what resources we have. You could do a keyword search on, for instance, Essex County, Massachusetts, or if it's part of a title, put in Essex County as well. You might even find the subject to be useful to put into a location, but keyword will catch everything. Narrowing it down into title and subject is going to make it a lot easier for scrolling. Say if you looked at someplace that's keyword of Suffolk County, Massachusetts, there's going to be a lot of books on Boston at a library based in Boston. But if it's part of the title, maybe you'll add an extra keyword. Or maybe you know the subject. It's Boston during the Revolutionary War, and that narrow it down. So try our catalog doing some shopping before you come and visit. On AmericanAncestors.org, we also have the resources that you can find to help you outside of the courses that you're attending now. We have very kindly added Irish research guides and other guides by genealogists on our staff. And this one is by Melanie McComb as well as Marie Daly, and it's an introduction and basis on Irish genealogical research. That's just one of the options. Well, you just don't want to read something. How about watching a video? Let me show you the next step. On americanancestors.org/video-library, you can find various online programs that you can watch right from home. And of course, other places outside of American Ancestors, where you're going to find that book. WorldCat, search.worldcat.org will bring you to the location where you may find a book. By putting in your zip code, will also tell you the nearest library that book is. Archive Grid through researchworks.oclc.org. Again, these URLs are all in your syllabus. You can find an archive that might maintain the personal family papers or local church records that have been placed in a regional archives. Just looking at this one alone of all the regional archives in the greater New York City area and the surrounding state of Connecticut, New Jersey, and parts of New York State. As an example of putting in John Adams in Bible, we find that there's a Bible record for John Adams' family at the New England Historic Genealogical Society, 3 pages. Or how about another family Bible that may mention John Adams in the key, the Captain Bushrod Bennett Taylor Bible? Again, try Archive Grid and change some of your keyword searches. And John Adams' Bible alone came up with over 80 matches. There are a variety of ebooks. The one thing that we probably all have are space concerns. It's nice to have lots of books, but not all of us have a lot of bookshelves or room for those books. But if you have a good sized thumb drive or a hard drive that you can get, or have your own cloud storage, getting digital books, purchasing some, or even getting free ones from places like hathitrust.org, books.google.com, my personal favorite, archive.org. In fact, when I perform a search, oftentimes for a county history, a book that's out of copyright, I go to Google, put archive.org, space the town name, history as a possible search word. And I find that book in sometimes a matter of seconds. And if it's out of copyright, you can find it there. In fact, archive.org allows you to sign up, and you can even check out a book that they might have for, say, an hour and find what you need and then log off. Openlibrary.org is another option you may have not tried. There are plenty of digital books on books.familysearch.org. And of course, the Smithsonian Institute has plenty of online books too to choose from. Give you a tip, update your research plan as you go. You've got a batch of things that you're going to tackle. Don't forget not just to rely on your research plan, but update it. Having a digital research plan, because you can download the template as I explained last week, means you can change it as you find new things and educate yourself on the resources as you move forward and you go to accomplish that research mystery you're seeking.
All right. Thank you so much, David. So we'll move into our second question session. We've had a few questions coming in here, but you can keep submitting those if you'd like. So first up, David, we have a couple of military questions.
Okay.
So someone asks, are many World War II records still unavailable simply because they are not old enough? When I search on Fold 3, I can find draft cards, but I have had difficulty locating more information on family members.
Mm-hmm.
I know I have a cousin that was a pilot, but when I search his name, nothing comes up. I'm wondering if there are other ways to search on that site.
Well, there's unfortunately something that occurred in St. Louis, Missouri in 1973 as part of the reason. The United States Personnel Military Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri had a fire. The fire caused the loss of all United States Army personnel files from 1912 to 1973, as well as the precursor of the Army Air Corps and later Air Force. So the reason you're not finding it might be because the multitude of the records that you would normally see are not there. The other thing to keep in mind is that we still have thousands of World War II veterans alive. Even though the average age is over 96 years old, these male and female veterans still require the privacy of their records that do survive. Now, if it's a direct family member, like a parent or a grandparent, you can still make a request to the Personnel Records Center because there are burnt files. There are records that exist. Um, in recent years, we've given classes on World War II research, and um, I, I would say that you probably would enjoy some of our previous classes to get a little expanded, but you're more than welcome to contact me for anything specific. But I'm going to give you a tip. Try on the local level. If you're trying to find military records, when somebody comes home with an honorable discharge, oftentimes the Adjutant General's office of their state keeps a copy of their DD 214, their honorable discharge. That will tell you the medals, oftentimes where they were located, and you may then find out what squadron this pilot was in, or even where they were. With so many newspapers being digitized, plugging in the regiment or the name of the person might give you an article in a hometown paper about them going off to war or maybe a letter they sent to a loved one back in the community that will speak to the stories that you're hoping to find. But don't give up. Even though there was a fire in St. Louis in 1973, there's other ways around to find other records when the personnel file. And again, that's partly the reason we're not seeing a lot on fold 3 yet, is because of those veterans are still alive in many cases.
Great, thank you, David. Yeah, such a shame about that fire. Another question here. My father was in the service during the Vietnam War. Are these records available yet, or is it like the census where nothing after a certain date is available because it remains protected?
And well, that's partly the reason, and also depending on what branch you're service. Now, I did mention about the Army and the Air Force and the Army Air Corps. The Marine Corps records and the Navy records didn't get affected by the fire. In fact, they're in another part of the building that didn't even get touched. Luckily, those still survive. Now, if your father is still alive, your father can make the request for his military file from St. Louis. And again, if it's Army, again, 1973. So if he was in Vietnam through 1975, there may be a partial file that still exists. Also, if your dad was ever in the VA may have a copy of a file on your father. Also, again, using the same idea for World War II, when you got out of the service, the Adjutant General of the state your dad came home to would have a copy of his discharge, his DD 214, which might give us some insight into it as well. Um, if your father is not alive, you as their child can make a request. Oftentimes, both organizations, either the Adjutant General or when you're filling out your request with the Personnel Records Center, see if there's any burnt records or anything that survives in your dad's file. You may have to provide a copy, a photocopy of their death record or an obituary or some proof that your father can't make the request himself.
Great, thank you, David. Then another question here. Somebody says, I live in southern New Mexico, which used to be part of Spain, then Mexico, and finally a territory and later a state. I'm
Mhm.
trying to help a friend find her Mexican history. It's much more confusing than I thought. Any suggestions on how to start?
FamilySearch.org has done a tremendous job to digitize both Mexican church and civil records. And so if you go to the Family Search wiki on Mexico and you know the region where that part of New Mexico was called in Mexico, you may find that there are some records from a Mexican archives that exist. On the county level, once it became New Mexico, I would look at probates and deeds and what vital records were created probably at least by the 20th century that may aid you in getting those earlier generations. It is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. There could even be records early on that are in Spain from early religious groups that had settled into Mexico. So don't rule out records that could be across the sea besides in Mexico and also might still be in New Mexico itself.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then next up, we have kind of a fun question here. Somebody asks, if you could purchase only one book for family history, what would it be?
One book for family history. That's a great question for my social media page.
Yeah.
I love to share the results. I would say that it would have to be a book that dealt with the region I was most interested in. Now,
Mhm.
give you an example. My ancestry is divided into sort of three quadrants of research. I have my old New England line. So in that case, I'd want Rhonda's New England Handbook. But I've also have a lot of people from Atlantic Canada. So the Atlantic Canadian Research Guide by the late Terry Punch and George Sanborn has to definitely be on my shelf. But I also have a grandfather from England, and knowing all the different parishes and where they're located, that would be Fillmore's Atlas of England, which is still in print. I find that these three guides answer three locations. So I guess it's really specific on the location and also the time. Is there one book that answers all questions for all genealogists? Haven't found it yet, but if you know what it is, pass it on.
I guess maybe a DNA book would get the closest to being the most
Ah,
universal.
yeah, DNA would definitely be that. And hey, that's a question you could pose to Melanie next week. Because
Yes.
Melanie is our star DNA expert. I am personally pleased with the DNA book done by Blaine Bettinger. That book has aided me often. And I don't have the book in front of me to give you the exact title, but if you put Blaine Bettinger and DNA into American Ancestors, our library catalog, you'll come across the title because we have it on the shelf.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And then, kind of stemming off of this question,
Mhm.
somebody just wrote in to ask, is there a book on the Midwest that you would recommend?
On the Midwest as a region itself, again, I would find that getting a book that's on the state. And now there are plenty of books on like migration, for instance. Um, One of the ones by E.K. Matthews talks about migration out of New England. It goes all the way out to the West Coast. And that's a fabulous book dealing with migration between the 17th century right on to the time of the Civil War. It really depends on what you're hoping to find. I always say to drill down to the resource of what you're hoping to find. If it's local history, a lot of towns in the Midwest may not have a town history, unless, of course, there's been like a 100th anniversary or 150th. And oftentimes those books are have all the the local people in town that are celebrating pictures of a parade, not a lot of genealogy content. It's the 19th and 20th century mug books, as we call them, or county histories that often will cover a region very well and give images and will give histories. So a county history in a place in the Midwest is going to be invaluable, and you might find it on archive.org because a lot of them again are out of copyright, or getting a good history of that state itself. And that would be where I would turn to the state library of that particular state and say, I am doing genealogy. What is the most updated book on your state's history that what I would recommend to get? And that's what I would do at least.
Great, thank you. And I'll also add that David and I actually led a trip to the Midwest Genealogy
Mhm.
Center Library a few months back, and that's a wonderful repository as well. That could be a good place to look. It's located in Independence, Missouri, if you happen to be in that area.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
first time that we went out there, and it is a tremendous resource. But again, so many resources are available, and there are guides. So you even with the Midwest, they may have a guide that's going to be even focused on a particular state of what resources they have. Um, and again, time period is something you have to take into consideration too, because the history of the Midwest in the 19th century is going to be a little different than say one in the 20th century. So getting the scope of the region is good, but definitely contact them in Independence. It's also worth a visit. Hope that we go back there again, Kathleen. It was a great trip.
yes, I think we probably will. So you can keep an eye out for that. I think we'll probably be going in the next year or so. And I'll also just mention, as we're kind of talking about books, I think David would agree with this. Definitely check your local libraries too if you are kind of deciding what you want to buy and not. Your local library will likely have a lot of great genealogy reference books and things like that, or possibly a local genealogy club or society or something like that. So if you're kind of weighing what to buy, definitely check out your library as well. So I think we'll leave questions there for now. We will have one more question session for all remaining questions that come in. But for now, David, I'll turn things back over to you.
All right, great. Well, we've been talking about it using a research log and that I was going to cover it from the last class. So let's talk about it now as we close up this third class. Why keep a research log? Well, first off, it keeps track of what you've searched already. Remember that research plan that you've been now using? Well, a research log will keep track of all of those items that you had a theory that you were going to search and what you were hoping to find. And you want to write down the search strings of what you may have found. One record may have led to another, to another. It really prevents rework. The worst thing in the world for me is to go to places and find out, oh, this is a great resource. Forget my research log and start looking at it and realizing the handwriting looks vaguely familiar. And then I find a record and I'm like, oh, I already have a copy of that. Excuse me for just 1 second as I clear my throat. Sorry about that. I just had to cough and I did not want to cough in your ear. It also allows you to record your negative findings. Now, we'd like to hope that our research log is going to have success from A to Z. Sometimes things don't always rule out, or the records may have not been kept long enough, or what the record that you were hoping for isn't indexed yet, or it's not accessible because the records are too recent. So put in your notes and your results, and Melanie is going to be dealing with the research part of it. So that's why research log, your final results are going to be explained more so with Melanie. It will also allow you to cite your sources, which allows you to go back and check them again. And that's why it's always good to have a digital research log. And guess what? You can download that. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. And then obviously the research log, bottom line, it can be a roadmap for the research process and doesn't allow you to go off the path. Remember I said in the last class, it's so easy to fall down a rabbit hole. A research log will keep you straight on that path. The purpose of a research log. Categories of research log might include an individual person. How about you trying to find everything there is because you have a lot of family from a place, like a lot of my family comes from Newbury, Massachusetts. I would want to go into a regional archive and find out what do we have available and then apply it to a research log on a particular person. Maybe you're researching an entire family or one name study. Maybe you're researching a historical event, something like the Salem witchcraft trial. Or you're going to a repository like the Family History Library we visit in the fall every year and finding out what records are going to best suit you there. And then again, breaking another further research log down to individual families. And maybe it's a general purpose. Research logs are very valuable. And as I alluded before, typically I put a research log for each one of my ancestors that I'm researching in the course of the year, sort of my shopping list. But how about going back to Lindsay's family tree? She had that one person born in Italy. She doesn't know where or when. Well, I'm going to have to look at a different category in different places, in different regions. So I might have a research log, not just for a person, but for one event or fact I'm trying to prove. That might give me plenty of things. I might need a research log per event. So depending on what you need. What to include on the research log, obviously the category of the research itself that you're doing. That way you'll, when you're looking at it, because they kind of start to look alike, you have the title. The main research objective you're going after, which you would have got from your research plan that you created earlier. It will give you your different detailed research objectives that you can fill in when you search it and find your results. And that will be part of what Melanie will talk about. What you searched, a book, a record, a database, a microfilm, the repository and call number citation information that you're going to need when you go to that repository or look for that website. And then, of course, the end result, hopefully you find something. And maybe your research log will lead you to creating a new one because you've exhausted a batch of searches. And again, you'll reach back to ask a genealogist and American ancestors to say, what will you do next? Give me some suggestions. On AmericanAncestors.org, if you simply go onto our website and on the next screen, we'll see that drop down again, and that's under Tools. Go back to Research Templates where you got your research plan template before, and there's a research log. From the research log, you can get the research log template in an annotated research log. It's a fillable PDF. The annotated log is an Excel file you can open up. And this is giving an example of how much detail you can actually add into an annotated versus a regular research log, but we're going to cover the research log tonight. The research log template as your main objective. the repository that you might be searching it in for. So it's like kind of bringing your shopping list to the place. The source of the information that you're looking for, the title, the author, the publisher, publication date, etc. Because it's digital, you can expand the fields. Call number, film number, the URL for the website. What's your detailed objective? And finally, what were the results when you looked for it? What to fill in before viewing a record? Again, put in your main objective, the person, place, event, or focus of your research study. The date that you are going to visit, or to kind of maybe even create sort of a trip planner, if you will, or the date when you get there. You could put that in later. That way you remember when you last visited, because if you go to a repository, they may have added new things. The source of the repository, example, ancestry.com for the 1870 census, specifically New Albany, Indiana. Is there a call number, if any? That manuscript number or the book call number is going to help you. So when you go there, you don't have to spend time looking at a catalog because you've already done so. The detailed objectives, you want to write down the person or event you want to seek for each search, so you will later know whether you need to search the same source again for a different person or a different event. You might find that you create a research log per person, but some of the same things are going to be applicable to multiple ancestors. So you may create a research log for that specific region as a place and put down the different people that you're hoping to find in the record groups they have. I'm going to give you a case study using a research log with unsourced genealogy from 1881. Now, this genealogy done 144 years ago was a memoir and genealogy of John Poor by the noted genealogist Alfred Poor. Alfred Poor traveled around New England gathering up information on the descendants of John Poor of Newbury, Massachusetts. One of the people he wrote to family was for Henry Poor. And what we have here is a typical genealogical narrative. What are we not seeing here? Citations, footnotes, even inserted notes. Pretty much it's like a conversation of genealogical facts. In fact, part of it goes on that he was a cabinet maker, resided in Newburyport, where 4 children were born, then Calais, Maine, about 10 years, returned to Newburyport, where his first wife died, and where he married his second wife. He afterwards removed to Boston, where he deceased in April of 1852, and was interred at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and then begins to list his children. But for the practice of this research log, we're going to just concentrate on Henry and his 2 wives, Abigail and Martha. As I look at the book, I'm looking at facts that are unsourced. So I might start just even in Word or my research log, put down the facts that I need to verify. Because this is unsourced, this is typically why so many people are applying to hereditary societies, but it's in a genealogy. It's got to be right. When Alfred Poor did this, it was done purely by correspondence. Somebody wrote a letter. Maybe he looked at some of the records, but we don't know because there's no indication. So what you're doing is fact checking a published genealogy, making it more valid. So we can put down his birth. We could put down another question. He was married August 23rd, 1792 to Abigail Johnson Hughes. He married secondly after 1821. We know that because Abigail dies that year. And he marries to Martha Loring Harrington, but doesn't give the date of that marriage. We know from this sketch, it says that he died in Boston in April 1852, but we don't have a full date, and buried at Mount Auburn. Mount Auburn where? So I might have to do some creative Google searching to see what Mount Auburn Cemetery is located near Boston. And of course, I found out quickly it's across the Charles River in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have these facts. Now I apply them to a research log itself. Remember, put in your main objectives, the source information, the call number, and your detailed objectives. And once I filled in the information that I was just speaking about, I can have a log that looks like this. The main objective for research logs is to locate the vital record and other primary records for Henry Poor and his family of Massachusetts. That is my main objective. The detailed objectives for my research log are coming right from that published genealogy. What am I trying to verify? Well, I found a birth in 1769 with a date, so I'm looking for a birth record. Looking for a death record. We know he died in Boston in 1852. I know that there are two marriages I need to find. But then I start to think outside the box. Well, there's other things I'd like to know. Well, obviously, Henry was alive in 1769, so he's an adult by the time of the 1790 census. And he's alive to 1852, so he should be on every census between 1790 and 1850. What U.S. censuses will give me details about his family? Other objectives for the research log is I think, well, I know he's buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. Does he have a gravestone? Not every burial in a cemetery necessarily has a gravestone, so I want to see if I could find that. Does he serve in the War of 1812? Because he's right about the age that he obviously just a child at the time of the Revolution, but not out of the realm of possibility for military service. And military service is such a valuable place to add more biographical detail and put into your ancestors' story timeline. Well, I mean, I'm going to also want to check he's in Boston and also Newburyport. Both of them are cities, and there are sometimes city directories that will exist that might list a person. They're going to give their occupation. So maybe I can confirm that cabinet maker, or maybe I can find another occupation he had, or find when he specifically left one place and maybe moved to another. Well, it doesn't say any thing in that sketch that he had a last will and testament. Doesn't mean that the author never looked. And it also might mean he didn't have one. But I don't want to give up the fact just assuming, so I might check for last will and testament or to see if he appears in any probate record at all. There's so much things we can do now with full text search. And, well, does he own any land in Boston where he died? Well, it might be worth to check the deeds and see what's available. So I have these questions. Then I have my research log. I plug them in. Once I plug them in, as you can see, Massachusetts Vital Records on American Ancestors. Objective, birth record of Henry Poor, Newbury, June 20th, 1769. Mass Vital Records, 1841 to 1910. Should help me on American Ancestors again with a death record of Henry Poor in April of 1852-53. Because when someone doesn't give an exact date, I always don't give an exact year. Play around with the years, especially if you think that something is from oral tradition. Massachusetts Vital Records, 1620 to 1850. American Ancestors, marriage of Henry Poor to Martha Loring Harrington. Also for his first wife, Abigail Johnson Hughes. Census and voter records, Ancestry.com. I can check the 1790 to 1850. World's largest gravesite collection, findagrave.com. Is there a gravestone for Henry? How about that military question? U.S. Army Register of Enlistments. That's just one place I can try, and that's on Ancestry. U.S. city directories, also on Ancestry. Is he in Boston or Newburyport? Do they have city directories for that time frame? Suffolk County probate. Want to see if he has a last will and testament? Well, luckily, some of those records are on AmericanAncestors.org, at least an index that covers to 1893. And then maybe I can find a repository I can get the record. Suffolk County deeds also are available in this game on FamilySearch.org. Does he own land? So I have my source, my call number, in this case, a website location, and my detailed objectives. Well, I'd love to share what all the results are and how to strategize that, but I'm going to leave that for class 4 for Melanie McComb, because Melanie will be giving the research portion using the same very detailed research log, and we'll find out what does exist for Henry Poor and what is correct. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to turn to the third chance for questions. So I welcome questions from you and look forward to hopefully seeing you in person at American Ancestors in the near future or one of our research programs.
All right. right. Thank you so much, David, for that great class tonight. A lot of great information shared. So we will move into our final question session. So any remaining questions, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A panel. So we do have one here, David, from somebody who is asking if you have any recommendations for resources on the railroad.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The railroad's great. I'm I'm going to make the assumption they mean the United States. My great grandfather was an engineer for the Canadian National Railway and Intercolonial, so there's some Canadian resources you can find at the Archives of Canada as well as Ancestry. Now, one of the things for the railroad is the Railroad Retirement Board. So if somebody was an engineer in the 20th century, you may find because the Railroad Retirement Board is different than Social Security and you can find that information. If you know that your ancestor worked for a particular railroad company, a lot of them have archives. May it be Amtrak or New York, New Haven, Hartford Railroad. There are often universities or places where there are corporate archives that sometimes have employee lists. The other thing for the railroad, try those local newspapers. Was he an engineer or a brakeman or worked as a conductor? Is he in any particular story that was connected to the railroad? Looking at newspapers will often give us a glimpse that not the private records kept by the company may not.
All right, thank you so much. That does wrap up questions for now. However, I know sometimes I say that too soon and then somebody's typing away. So I'm
Mhm.
just going to give everyone a few seconds here in case anyone is typing.
You
Um,
got one.
oh, yep,
Yep.
it works like a charm. There's always somebody who's typing when I'm ready to wrap up. So
Sure.
perfect. Glad we caught you there. So we do have somebody who asks if you have a recommendation for the best book on New Hampshire research.
The best book on New Hampshire research. Well, first I would start, and again, charity starts at home here, and I'm giving a plug for our New England Handbook for getting to where to find research in New Hampshire. Rhonda's guide is phenomenal. Again, because you get the breakdowns of the towns when they're incorporated, the parent towns, all of the county probate and land, the different repositories you can search. So besides New Hampshire, you get the rest of New England when you get it. Um, there are a variety of different published resources that were done years ago for New Hampshire. There's one that comes to mind, and by all means, you can drop me a note at DA Lambert at nehgs.org. There's one that basically I've used it a lot. Somebody went through in the 1930s and 40s, and there's in a later edition where they went through all the town histories that had genealogy chapters. So if you're looking for the Lambert name, for instance, I can know what town histories there's a good little genealogy chapter on, say, the Lamberts. And that kind of pinpoints you to where someone might be in New Hampshire. So drop me an email and I'll get you that title. I just can't recall it right off the top of my head, but I'm glad to drop you a note with it.
All right, perfect. And David's email is shared on the handout for tonight and on the course page as well. And you can always email me as well if you'd like, and I can forward it along to David as well.
Mhm.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again so much, David, for that great lecture tonight. And thank
My
you to all
pleasure.
of you out there for your great questions as well. We will leave things there for this evening. But if you do think of questions later on, as David said, you can certainly drop him a line. Again, his email is shared on the handout for tonight and on the web page. You can also, of course, reply to any of the emails I send to ask questions, or you can write to us at education@nhgs.org. As always, if you're interested in having us do research on your behalf, you can contact us at research@nhgs.org. And if you have more general reference questions about any area of your family history, you can chat with our genealogists. David mentioned this earlier on, and that free chat service is available Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5 Eastern Time, and you can access it at americanancestors.org/chat. Again, totally free and open to the public. We really urge you to check that out. It's a great resource. You can also book a one-on-one consultation with one of our experts at the link shown on your screen here or through the QR code displayed there as well. And I'll also mention, I mentioned this last week as well, that David does a lot of these consultations. So you can even book one with him if you'd like to do that. You'll find a recording of tonight's class as well as the handout and the slides at the course web page shown on your screen. This URL has been shared with you by email, and you can also find it under the My Account section of our website under digital content. And you will have access to all of these materials for the foreseeable future. So thank you all again for joining us for this third class of our 5-session seminar. Be sure to join us again next week at the same time when Melanie McComb will join us to present the class on research. To join that class, just go to the course page and click on the same join link that you used for tonight. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org. I look forward to seeing you all online again next week, and goodbye for now.